You're too gentle for this world, Liam. His former boss once sneered, a blacksmith rooted in kindness, blind to the storm one act of compassion would unleash. That bitter winter night, he faced the choice between self-preservation and sacrifice, his last dollar clutching tight in frozen fingers. Hours later, jet engines roared overhead, their thunder promising a destiny he couldn't have imagined. Hello everyone, welcome to Unveiled Narratives. Today, I bring you a story that will restore your faith in humanity and remind you that sometimes, the most unexpected heroes emerge from the quiet corners of metalworking shops and the frozen streets of winter nights. The hammering stopped at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would change everything. Liam Turner looked up from his workbench, sweat beading on his forehead despite the December chill that seeped through the workshop's thin walls. For 12 years, he had worked at Iron Forge Industries, the largest metalworks facility in Millbrook, a small industrial town where the sound of hammering metal was as common as church bells on Sunday morning. Blake Donovan, the shop owner, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, his face twisted into the familiar expression of barely contained disdain. Blake was a man who had inherited his father's business but not his father's skill or character. Where the elder Donovan had been respected for his craftsmanship and fair treatment of workers, Blake ruled through intimidation and constant criticism. "Pack your things, Turner," Blake said, his voice cutting through the workshop's ambient noise. "You're done here." Liam set down his hammer carefully, his calloused hands trembling slightly. Around him, the other workers had gone silent, their own hammering ceased as they watched the scene unfold. Some looked sympathetic, others merely curious about the drama. None would speak up, they all knew Blake's temper too well. "Sir, I don't understand," Liam said quietly, his voice barely audible above the cooling metal's soft pings and crackles. "Have I done something wrong? My work has always—" "Your work," Blake interrupted, stepping closer, "is adequate at best. I need craftsmen who can push this business forward, not hold it back with their slow, methodical approach. You're too gentle, too careful. In this business, speed matters more than perfection." The words hit Liam like physical blows. He had always taken pride in his work, in the way he could coax metal into exactly the right shape, in the precision of his joints and the smoothness of his finishes. While others hammered quickly and loudly, Liam listened to the metal, understanding its properties, working with it rather than against it. "I've been here 12 years, Liam said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "I've never missed a day, never caused trouble, surely." 12 years of mediocrity, Blake shot back. "I'm done carrying dead weight, clean out your locker and go." The workshop remained silent as Liam gathered his few personal belongings, a pair of worn leather gloves his father had given him, a small tool kit he'd assembled over the years, and a thermos that had seen better days. His movements were deliberate, dignified despite the humiliation. He said goodbye to his coworkers quietly, shaking hands with those who would meet his eyes. As he walked out into the winter afternoon, Liam felt the weight of uncertainty crushing down on him. At 42, he had no family, few friends, and now no job. His savings account held exactly $847.33, enough to cover rent for maybe 2 months if he was careful. In his pocket, he carried his last week's pay, a crumpled $100 bill that Blake had tossed at him like scraps to a dog. The walk home through Millbrook's quiet streets gave Liam time to think, though his thoughts were far from comforting. The town had been struggling economically for years, and good jobs were scarce. Most of the other metalworking shops had closed or downsized. At his age, finding new employment would be challenging, especially in a field where his reputation for being too slow might have preceded him. His small rental house sat at the end of Maple Street, a modest 2-bedroom structure that had been his home for the past 8 years. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was understanding but not charitable. She had her own bills to pay. Liam made himself a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers, trying to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in his stomach. As darkness fell, the winter wind picked up, howling through the bare trees and rattling the windows. Liam found himself unable to sit still, pacing from room to room like a caged animal. Finally, he pulled on his coat and decided to take a walk, hoping the cold air might clear his head and help him think more clearly about his situation. The streets were largely empty, most sensible people having retreated indoors to escape the bitter cold. Liam walked without destination, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. His footsteps echoed off the empty storefronts and shuttered businesses that lined Main Street, a reminder of the town's economic struggles. As he turned onto Church Street, passing the old St. Mary's Cathedral that had stood there for nearly a century, Liam noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Huddled against the church's stone steps was a figure that he almost mistook for a pile of discarded clothing. It was only when he moved closer that he realized it was a person, an elderly man curled up in a futile attempt to conserve body heat. The man was in terrible condition. His clothes were little more than rags, inadequate protection against the brutal cold. His feet were bare, the skin mottled and blue with cold. His breathing was shallow and labored, and when Liam knelt beside him, he could see that the man was barely conscious. "Sir," Liam said gently, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and filled with confusion. He tried to speak but only managed a weak croak. Liam could see that hypothermia was setting in. If this man didn't get warm soon, he would die on these church steps. Liam looked around, hoping to see someone else who might help, but the street was deserted. The church itself was locked up tight, its windows dark. He pulled out his phone and considered calling 911, but he knew that even if an ambulance came, they would take the man to the county hospital, where he would be stabilized and then likely discharged back to the streets within hours. Without hesitation, Liam removed his own coat and wrapped it around the freezing man. The cold immediately bit into his body, but he ignored it. He gently lifted the man's head, trying to rouse him enough to communicate. "I'm going to get you help," Liam said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Just hold on." He flagged down the next car that passed, a taxi whose driver initially looked reluctant to stop. When Liam explained the situation, the driver's expression softened slightly. "Look, buddy," the driver said, "I can't take someone in that condition in my cab. Liability issues, you know." Liam pulled out his wallet and removed the $100 bill, his last payment from Iron Forge Industries. "This should cover the fare and then some," he said, handing the money to the driver. "Please just take him to Millbrook General. He's going to die if we leave him here." The driver looked at the money, then at Liam's earnest face, then at the nearly unconscious man on the church steps. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "All right, but you're coming with me to help get him in the car." Together, they carefully lifted the man and placed him in the back seat of the taxi. Liam tucked his coat more securely around the stranger's shoulders, then closed the door and watched as the cab disappeared into the night. He stood there for several minutes, shivering in the cold, before beginning the long walk home. That night, Liam lay in bed replaying the events of the day. He had lost his job and given away his last $100 to a stranger whose name he didn't even know. By any rational measure, it had been a foolish decision. He had no idea if the man would survive, no way of knowing if his sacrifice had made any difference. Yet somehow, despite everything, he felt a strange sense of peace. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost covering the windows of Liam's house. He had just finished his simple breakfast of toast and coffee when a sound unlike anything he had ever heard shattered the morning quiet. It was a deep, thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Liam rushed to his window and looked out to see neighbors emerging from their homes, all looking skyward with expressions of wonder and confusion. Following their gaze, he saw something that defied belief. A military jet, sleek and powerful, circling low over the residential area. The aircraft made one more pass before descending toward the large, empty field behind Liam's house, the same field where local children played baseball in the summer and where the annual county fair was held each October. The jet's engines kicked up clouds of dust and debris as it touched down, the noise gradually subsiding to a low rumble. Liam grabbed his coat and ran outside, joining the growing crowd of neighbors who had gathered to witness this unprecedented event. The jet's engines slowly wound down, and after a few minutes a hatch opened. Several figures in military uniforms emerged, their movements crisp and purposeful. One of them, a young man with captain's bars on his uniform, approached the crowd. His eyes scanned the gathered faces before settling on Liam. "Are you Liam Turner?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of command but softened with something that might have been gratitude. "I am," Liam replied, his heart pounding. "But I don't understand." "My name is Captain Elijah Stone," the officer said, extending his hand. "I need to speak with you privately if you don't mind." Liam shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the intensity in the young man's eyes. "Of course, but the man you helped last night," Captain Stone interrupted gently. "He's my father, retired Sergeant Major Benjamin Stone. He's been missing for 3 weeks." The words hit Liam like a physical blow. The freezing man on the church steps had been a retired military officer, a father whose son had been desperately searching for him. Is he alive? Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He's alive, Captain Stone confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. Thanks to you. The doctors said another hour in that cold would have killed him. You saved his life. Liam felt his knees go weak with relief. I'm just glad he's okay. I was worried. He woke up this morning, Captain Stone continued, and the first thing he asked about was the man who gave him his coat and paid for his ride to the hospital. He described you perfectly, said you gave the taxi driver money and wouldn't even tell him your name. The captain gestured toward the jet where other military personnel were unloading equipment. My father is a proud man, Mr. Turner. He's also a man who believes in repaying debts. When he learned what you had done, giving your last dollar to a stranger, he made some calls. You see, before he retired, my father worked in military procurement. He specialized in metallurgy and advanced materials. Liam's confusion must have shown on his face because Captain Stone smiled and continued. He made some inquiries about you, Mr. Turner. It seems your former employer, Blake Donovan, has been telling people that you're a substandard craftsman, but that's not what the evidence suggests. Captain Stone nodded to one of his men who brought forward a metal briefcase. These are samples of work you completed over the past year at Ironforge Industries. My father had them analyzed by military metallurgists. The precision, the attention to detail, the quality of the workmanship, it's exceptional. Far superior to anything else coming out of that facility. Liam stared at the briefcase, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. I don't understand, Blake said. Blake Donovan is a mediocre craftsman who inherited a business he doesn't understand, Captain Stone said firmly. He fired you not because you were inadequate, but because your work made his look amateur by comparison. My father suspects that Donovan has been passing off some of your work as his own, particularly on government contracts. The implications of this revelation were staggering. For years, Liam had accepted Blake's criticism, believing that his careful, methodical approach was somehow deficient. To learn that his work was not only good but exceptional was almost too much to process. There's more, Captain Stone continued. My father has recommended you for a position with the Department of Defense. We're developing new materials for military applications. Lightweight alloys, composite metals, things that require exactly the kind of precision and attention to detail that you've demonstrated. Liam's head was spinning. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been unemployed and desperate. Now he was being offered a job with the federal government in his field of expertise based on the recommendation of a man whose life he had saved without expecting anything in return. The position comes with a substantial salary increase, Captain Stone added, as well as full benefits and security clearance. You'd be working with some of the most advanced materials in the world, contributing to projects that could save soldiers' lives. The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, and Liam became aware that they were all watching this extraordinary scene unfold. Mrs. Chen, his landlord, stood at the edge of the group with tears in her eyes. Several of his former co-workers from Ironforge Industries had arrived, their faces showing a mixture of amazement and vindication. I need to ask you something, Liam said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Why go to all this trouble? Your father is safe, and I'm grateful for that, but surely there are other qualified metallurgists. My father spent 30 years in the military, Captain Stone replied. He learned to judge character as well as he learned to judge metal. He said that any man willing to give his last dollar to a stranger without expectation of reward or recognition is the kind of man the military needs. Character, he said, is rarer than skill, and you have both. Captain Stone reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather folder. This is a preliminary contract. The full position would require security clearance and additional interviews, but based on my father's assessment and the quality of your work, I'm authorized to offer you immediate employment as a consultant while the paperwork is processed. Liam took the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a contract offering him more money than he had ever imagined earning, along with benefits and opportunities that seemed almost too good to be true. But it was real as the military jet sitting in the field behind his house, as real as the uniformed officers who had come to find him. Your father, Liam said, looking up at Captain Stone. When can I see him? I'd like to know that he's truly all right. He's at Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, Captain Stone replied. Part of your new position would involve working at facilities in the DC area. He's looking forward to meeting you properly, to thanking you in person for what you did. As the morning wore on, the details were worked out. Liam would have 2 weeks to settle his affairs in Millbrook before reporting to his new position. The military would handle his relocation expenses, and he would be provided with temporary housing until he found a permanent place to live. The jet departed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind only the memory of its thunderous engines and the transformed life of a man who had given everything to help a stranger. As the crowd of neighbors dispersed, many stopped to congratulate Liam, to express their amazement at the morning's events. Blake Donovan arrived just as the last of the military personnel were leaving. He pushed through the remaining crowd with his characteristic arrogance, his face flushed with what might have been anger or embarrassment. "Turner," he called out, his voice carrying its familiar note of contempt. "I heard some ridiculous story about you getting a job with the government. What kind of nonsense are you spreading?" Liam turned to face his former employer, and for the first time in 12 years he felt no intimidation, no need to defend himself or explain his actions. "It's not nonsense, Blake," he said quietly. "It's the truth. It seems my work is more valuable than either of us realized." Blake's face went pale as the implications sank in. If Liam had truly been recruited by the military based on his metallurgical skills, it meant that Blake's assessment of his abilities had been catastrophically wrong. More than that, it meant that Blake had lost what might have been his most valuable employee. "You can't just leave," Blake sputtered. "I have contracts to fulfill, deadlines to meet. You have an obligation." "My obligation ended when you fired me," Liam replied, his voice steady and calm. "I owe you nothing, Blake, but I do owe you thanks. If you hadn't fired me, I would never have been walking the streets last night. I would never have found Benjamin Stone, and none of this would have happened." Blake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He stood there for a moment, his face cycling through various expressions of disbelief, anger, and something that might have been regret. Finally, he turned and walked away without another word. 2 weeks later, Liam stood in his new office at a secure government facility outside Washington, D.C. The laboratory was equipped with the most advanced metallurgical equipment he had ever seen, and his colleagues were some of the brightest minds in the field. The work was challenging and meaningful, contributing to projects that would protect soldiers and advance national security. On his first day, he was visited by Benjamin Stone, the man he had saved on that cold night in Millbrook. Benjamin was in his 70s, with silver hair and eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of decades of service. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from his time in Vietnam, but his handshake was firm and his smile was warm. "Mr. Turner," Benjamin said, his voice carrying the same authority as his son's but tempered with humility. "I've been looking forward to meeting you properly, to thanking you for what you did." "There's no need for thanks," Liam replied. "I'm just glad you're well. But I have to ask, how did you end up on those church steps? Your son mentioned you'd been missing for 3 weeks." Benjamin's expression grew somber. "It's a long story and not a particularly pleasant one. I've been struggling with some personal issues since my wife passed away last year. I started drinking more than I should have, making poor decisions. I ended up on the streets, too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to contact my family." He paused, looking out the window at the bustling activity of the government facility. "That night, I was giving up. I thought I was going to die on those church steps, and part of me was ready to let that happen. Then you came along, a stranger who saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it in myself." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Liam said, but Benjamin shook his head. "No, they wouldn't have. People walked past me for 3 weeks, Mr. Turner. You were the only one who stopped, the only one who cared enough to help." Benjamin reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. "This is for you. It's not much, but it belonged to my father and his father before him. I'd like you to have it." Inside the box was a watch, old but beautifully maintained, with an inscription on the back, "To those who serve with honor." Liam looked up at Benjamin, his eyes filled with emotion. "I can't accept this," he said. "It's too valuable, too meaningful." "You've already accepted it," Benjamin replied firmly. "The moment you stop to help a stranger, you prove that you understand what service really means. It's not about the uniform or the rank, it's about putting others before yourself, about doing what's right even when no one is watching." As the months passed, Liam threw himself into his new work with passion and dedication. His projects contributed to the development of lighter, stronger armor for soldiers, more efficient materials for aircraft, and protective equipment that would save countless lives. His colleagues respected his expertise and valued his thoughtful approach to problem solving. But perhaps more importantly, he had found a new sense of purpose and belonging. The military community had welcomed him as family, and he had formed lasting friendships with people who shared his values and dedication to service. Benjamin Stone became not just a colleague but a mentor and friend. They met regularly for coffee, sharing stories and insights about their work and their lives. Benjamin's son, Captain Stone, had been promoted to major and often stopped by when his duties brought him to the facility. On the first anniversary of that fateful night in Millbrook, Liam received an unexpected visitor. Blake Donovan stood in the lobby of the government facility. Looking older and more worn than Liam remembered, he had requested a meeting, and despite their history, Liam had agreed to see him. "I've come to apologize," Blake said without preamble, "and to ask for your help." Liam gestured to a chair in his office, and Blake sat down heavily. "Ironforge Industries is failing," Blake continued. "Without your work, without your expertise, I can't maintain the quality that our contracts require. I've lost 3 major accounts in the past year, and the business is hemorrhaging money." "I'm sorry to hear that," Liam said, and he meant it. Despite everything, he took no pleasure in Blake's misfortune. "I was wrong about you," Blake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was threatened by your skill, jealous of your reputation among the workers. Instead of learning from you, I tried to tear you down. It was petty and stupid, and it's cost me everything." Blake looked up at Liam, his eyes filled with desperation. "I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider coming back? I'll make you a full partner, give you complete control over the technical operations. I'll pay you whatever you ask." Liam considered the offer for a long moment. A year ago, he would have been grateful for any opportunity to return to his old life. Now, however, he had found something far more valuable than a job. He had found his calling. "I appreciate the offer, Blake," he said finally, "but I can't accept it. This is where I belong now. This is the work I was meant to do." Blake nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand. I just wanted to tell you that I was wrong, and I'm sorry." "Apology accepted," Liam said. "But Blake, there's something else. I've been working on some new alloy compositions that might be suitable for civilian applications. I could recommend you for a subcontract, nothing major, but enough to keep Ironforge Industries afloat while you rebuild." Blake's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "You would do that? After everything I did to you?" "Everyone deserves a second chance," Liam replied. "But this time, treat your employees with respect. Their skills and dedication are your most valuable assets." Blake left that day with a renewed sense of hope and a contract that would help save his business. More importantly, he left with a lesson about the power of humility and the importance of recognizing the value in others. As Liam watched him go, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. A single act of compassion on a cold winter night had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. Benjamin Stone had found his way back to his family and his purpose. Blake Donovan had learned the value of humility and respect. And Liam himself had discovered that his greatest strength was not his skill with metal, but his capacity for kindness. The $100 bill he had given to save a stranger's life had been repaid 1,000-fold, not in money but in meaning. He had learned that true success was not measured by personal achievement, but by the positive impact one could have on others. And he had discovered that sometimes the most important work of all was simply recognizing the worth and dignity of every human being. Years later, when Liam was asked to speak at military academies and civilian colleges about his career and experiences, he would always return to that night in Millbrook. He would tell his audiences about the moment when he had to choose between protecting his own interests and helping a stranger in need. He would explain how that choice had led to opportunities beyond his wildest dreams, but more importantly, how it had revealed the person he was meant to be. "Character is revealed in the choices we make when no one is watching," he would say. "When we choose compassion over self-interest, when we choose service over safety, when we choose to see the humanity in others even when they can't see it in themselves. Those are the moments that define us, that shape not just our own futures, but the futures of everyone whose lives we touch." The lesson was simple but profound. In a world that often seemed indifferent to suffering, one person's kindness could change everything. One act of compassion could save a life, transform a career, heal a relationship, and inspire countless others to choose hope over despair, service over selfishness, and love over fear. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that one act of kindness would come back to you in ways you never imagined. perhaps even in the form of a military jet landing in your backyard, carrying with it the promise of a new beginning and the proof that no good deed, no matter how small, is ever truly forgotten. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Unveiled Narratives. Your support helps us continue bringing you these inspiring tales of human kindness and unexpected connections. See you in the next story, where ordinary people discover that extraordinary things can happen when we choose compassion over indifference.